Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. As always, I'm James Crepea, joined this week by my esteemed colleague Bill Oram, who we managed to both attend the Friday game that was between Oregon and Michigan State, and former Oregon State coach Jonathan Smith, of course. So we will touch on that briefly, admittedly, because well, Bill, there really wasn't much to go over from that one, since it was not terribly competitive, but we will get to it, and we will take a few notes by way of our takeaways from that into what it may or may not mean, translate to, or extrapolate to when it comes to Oregon and Ohio State and the matchup that will certainly be setting the table for this week. But your takeaways, your impressions, your lasting memories from the Friday night game that was the first Big Ten home game at Autzen Stadium, a 31-10 win that was not nearly as close as the final score would otherwise show.
Yeah, James, I mean, it's hard to even think about that game when we have such a major occasion on the horizon here. But a couple things that do stand out. One, Michigan State is really bad, and Jonathan Smith is at the ground floor of a rebuild. And I think that's to be expected at Michigan State with kind of the way things have gone down there and the amount of turnover at really all levels of the program. And I don't think Jonathan Smith has really set expectations very high there. I think he's been very candid about the fact that this is going to take some time. But boy, they are really, really at stage one. But number two, I think, it's kind of hard to come out of the Michigan State game and not feel really, really good about the Ducks at almost every position except quarterback. And maybe that's a little unfair to Dillon Gabriel, who has been pretty excellent this year. Obviously has been very effective, but those two red zone interceptions were cause for alarm, in my opinion. He's going to see a lot tougher defenses, a lot tougher pressure against Ohio State. And you'd like to see a little more poise in those higher pressure moments from him. 3 interceptions in the last 2 weeks, including a pick 6 against UCLA. That is kind of the only red flag right now for these Ducks, in my opinion.
Yeah, the interceptions in the red zone, and of course that's entirely where the interceptions have been. They kind of go hand in hand at this moment. One, they're uncharacteristic. So in context and in fairness, you want to say, well, you have an entire body of work before he got to Oregon. And that would not be reflective of the body of work. So how much of these are anomalies and how much of these are things that are presenting themselves now because of perhaps underlying issues, and things of concern that really do apply that just didn't apply before. And how come they didn't apply before? I think it's a little bit of all of it. I think it's that it's not totally reflective at all of what Dillon Gabriel has done in his career, and the stats would show that. Having said that, I also think that Dillon Gabriel had the fortuitous situation, both at UCF and at Oklahoma, of playing some defenses that did not have very good players, particularly in the secondary. So he could afford to take some higher risk throws at times and hold on to the ball as he has, including in the red zone at times, and maybe didn't have to pay the price for it.
Yeah.
When he was at those previous stops, because if he threw and forced balls into tight windows, or had to throw it away, or whatever the case was, how many secondaries in the AAC or in the Big 12 could really make him pay? And here we've seen, all right, I'll even put the UCLA one aside insofar as that Tez slipped. Now, there was still enough time to avoid throwing his direction after he did slip, but I'll even caveat that one. With the 2 throws that we saw on Friday night, there was no particular excuse. The first one where it turns into a bootleg, but it was not drawn up to be a bootleg. The timing got messed up at the beginning. The throw was clearly, the first read was to go to Terrence Ferguson. He gets bumped multiple times, and good job by the Michigan State defense to alter the timing. And ultimately, once Gabriel starts to roll left a little bit, or even before he starts going, when he just shifts slightly and is still in the pocket for the most part, Herbert is open. Now, his line of sight to him is a little bit blocked, So, okay, he starts rolling left. He's still open. Only after he rolls all the way to the left does he then force the throw where, yes, there is a defender there who can jump the route and come away with an easy interception, which at that point he could have just thrown the ball away, lived to play another day, and them's the breaks. Or just run the ball, and whether he gained a yard or not, attempted to do something like that. But instead, he prolongs the play. On one hand, you can't totally knock him for it, but he throws it into a situation that was totally avoidable. When there was an open player, that same open player, earlier in the play. The second one is more of a rollout crossbody. Mm-hmm. It is difficult, but had time to set if he needed to. And ultimately, absolutely could have still thrown the ball to Evan Stewart. There was ample room in the back of the end zone. Rather than throwing it on a line where Michigan State's top corner, and probably one of the top opposing corners in the Big Ten, to be quite honest, where Brantley can jump the route. And it's one of those where you say, do you put the ball where only your guy can get it? Well, on that throw, no. Very much not. Mm-hmm. And it was possible to throw for Evan Stewart in the corner of the end zone, just maybe in the back corner of the end zone, where only he would have got it. And instead, you throw it on a line where, yes, unless you're going to throw it on just whip it at an unbelievable speed, crossbody, then yes, then the defender was going to have a chance to, at the very least, bat down the ball, if not come away with it. And they did. And like I said, so those were decisions that I think you can begin to have some degree of concern in terms of going forward, because those are things that you go, those are bad decisions in the first place, compounded by the fact that, hey, these defenses that they're about to play, especially this week, have the talent to capitalize on such decisions. The decision has to be to get rid of the ball either earlier or just throw it away and live to fight another day. You cannot put the ball in jeopardy in those spots. And he said as much after the game. It's not like he's lacking for accountability. Gabriel completely owned it. Just said, yeah, the things that you just can't do. And, hey, I seem to keep wanting to be making the same kind of mistakes, and I got to not do that. Well, yeah, yes, you do. Because in the bigger moments, as he said, in the bigger games, in those instances, in those 5 to 10 plays, in the games that are going to matter, that are going to be competitive, those are the plays that cost you a football game. Those are the plays that cost you a conference championship or the opportunity to play for one. And those are the plays that can cost you a playoff spot or end your season in the playoffs. And you cannot afford, for the 6th-year quarterback, most experienced quarterback in college football, you cannot afford, regardless of the circumstance, but especially for somebody who comes in with that, to be somebody who's going to put the ball in jeopardy in those spots.
I mean, I think that's all really well said, James. And I think the biggest thing is that you said there's room for a degree of concern. And I think that that's the thing that people need to remember here. You are dealing with a 6th-year quarterback, a guy who has seen, virtually every coverage that exists, has played in big games, has learned from his mistakes, I think, to some degree already this year. You've seen some growth week to week, and we're only five games in. So to me, I think that you give Dillon Gabriel some benefit of the doubt, except for the fact that Ohio State is coming to Autzen. There really isn't time for like a learning curve when you are about to play maybe the best team in the country. So that's why I think there is some agita or anxiety around Gabriel's performances and some of these mistakes. But, I kind of worry about Dillon Gabriel even beyond the interceptions. We saw him take a massive hit against Michigan State, absolutely got lit up, came off the field for a play, looked like maybe, he was at risk of having something a little more serious wrong, ended up finishing the game and playing well outside those 2 interceptions. But we have seen that kid take some absolutely brutal hits this year. The offensive line has gotten much better since the first 2 weeks. We've seen some growth there, which has been obviously extremely important. But I'd be curious for your take just on Dillon Gabriel's durability. And I mean, I had a moment watching that Michigan State game where, and I say this, knocking on wood and with full awareness, you can't predict injuries. But I looked over at, I think you, and said, he's going to get hurt at some point this season, the way this is playing out. Does he have enough protection, and is he going to be able to get rid of the ball fast enough going forward to avoid a situation where he's going to miss time?
I think the protection part is probably there, and that insofar as I don't think there are going to be enough teams who can really exploit whatever weaknesses may still lie. Now, Ohio State is one of them. But I'm not sure how many other teams on the schedule will really be able to make Oregon pay to the point where you say, all right, even outside of some extreme scenario, it's the protection would be the issue. It wasn't just that Gabriel was holding on to the football, which obviously he has done throughout his entire career. And I stress that, and that I'm not acting surprised that all of a sudden this is a characteristic of this quarterback. This is exactly, you knew what you were getting.
Totally. But if it's causing problems, you've got to coach it out of him. Yeah.
So how many of the remaining teams outside of Ohio State could really make Oregon pay insofar as pressure with or without the blitz to where they could really get after Gabriel no matter what the protection is doing? I think Illinois defensively is extremely well coached, and they might be able to dial up a couple of things. But when I say a couple, I mean a couple. I don't think that that's going to be a consistent thing. Michigan's defense certainly has some talent to where, again, that could be a thing. Maybe Washington. Mm-hmm. Maybe from a purely schematic standpoint. I don't think Wisconsin or Maryland, and certainly not Purdue, I do not think those teams will be able to exploit anything to the point that they really have to be concerned. But could the others certainly dial up something here or there outside of, like I say, always holding on to the ball for a while, and these, like we're talking about, these interceptions in the end zone. Yeah, look, I mean, he took a hit on the opening 3 and out on the third down. That was on a blitz, a delayed blitz from the safety that came off the right side, and the way that they protected, frankly, I'm not sure if the protection was right and, hey, there's just a free rusher and that's what you get, or if the offensive line needed to read that a little bit differently because both Cornelius and Harper took on the 1D lineman, and the running back that was in took on a player as well, but ultimately the safety blitzed off the right side untouched. Either way, whether that's a schematic thing or just, hey, he's got to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker because a free rusher is going to get that. Either way, that's something that I think those other 3 defenses could dial up and make a problem. That had nothing to do with how long Gabriel was holding on to the football. That was just simply a well-drawn-up defensive play in that moment. I don't think the other 3 could. So in the moments where he's holding on to the ball, in the moments where they're inside the red zone, those are the things that, plain and simple, he has just got to be better. And you heard at the end of the telecast in rewatching the game, the kind of internal barometer and assessment for success in that regard, in that he's got to get rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds or less. And that when he does, the level of performance and efficiency reflects that the good decisions start being made under those circumstances, and that where the issues start to come in is when he's holding on to the ball for longer. And there's an irony to that, because you would think, after all, the longer you hold on to the ball, the defense is going to have a hard time covering that long. You have bad defenses. But when they're playing the better ones, just because he had time to throw, that doesn't mean he's not under duress. That doesn't mean he's not rolling out. That doesn't mean he's not scrambling. And ultimately, it doesn't mean that he's going to end up making a great decision. So I think in terms of the red zone, which is the issue of the last 2 weeks, that things almost have to be simplified, in that this may have to be a one read at most 2 situation, and then the third is
throw it away
and throw the ball into the third row. Yeah.
I mean, don't you have some degree of confidence that I guess I just feel like you are dealing with an experienced and savvy quarterback who understands the pressure of the moment, understands the quality of the opponent, is going to be well coached going into this week. I feel that, and we can talk about this next week, and we can talk about how wrong I was potentially, but I just kind of have a feeling that you're going to see a more disciplined Dillon Gabriel against Ohio State. I mean, like you said, he knows what he did wrong against Michigan State, took full accountability for it. The coaches are going to are going to set him up for success, like you're talking about. Maybe you are simplifying a little bit. I just feel like you're going to see, unless this game just is completely lopsided and a rout in Ohio State's favor, I think you're going to see a much more composed and in command Dillon Gabriel on Saturday. Maybe that's wishful thinking based on some of what we've seen, but it just seems like this is not a guy who's going to, and this is not a team that is going to make the same mistakes into perpetuity. Maybe 2 weeks in a row, but not 3.
And I think when things are not just well protected, but when they are drawn up well, and again, this comes into the points of what we talk about of I thought that Oregon outcoached Michigan State beyond just being the better football team. I felt Oregon staff outcoached Michigan State staff, because when the job is to put your guys in the best position to succeed, I thought Oregon did that on both sides of the ball repeatedly, far more regularly than Michigan State did. I think Oregon's coaching staff defensively has done it pretty much the entire board, of course, the season thus far, albeit against competition they've had. But they're creating one-on-one opportunities for their best edge rushers and even internal guys, and they're making that happen. You know, everybody could say, well, just double-team Birch all day.
Yeah.
Well, lo and behold, they're managing to free him up just enough. So, bottom line, I think they're doing a really nice job defensively so far in that regard. Offensively, particularly since they've settled on this offensive line, I think that Will Stein has really hit stride and is back to form of last season in terms of putting in plays and calling up things at the right time that are really well drawn up, that, frankly, better defenses or better defensive coordinators who are better prepared would not only be prepared for themselves, but would prepare them players. But ultimately, that's their problem. I think what Stein has called up at times by way of plays, how they've attacked and put safeties in conflict multiple times now for multiple weeks now, and how they've gone about attacking that isn't just really good by the offensive coordinator, but clearly the quarterback is on the exact same page, because it becomes easy reads for Gabriel. The option keeper, the speed option keeper in the run against Oregon State, was an unbelievably easy play to read after the safety moved inside. It went according to plan. The deep throw to Tez at UCLA for the touchdown, again, went exactly according to plan as soon as the safety rolled up. Then you vacated that side of the field. As long as he outruns the guy, which you know he will, then it's a wide open deep bomb, and there you go. The screen to Terrence Ferguson against Michigan State, the defense, frankly, should have been able to read that a little bit, because there was a covered inside receiver who is not eligible. So the fact that he's running a route doesn't mean anything. He's blocking downfield, which technically speaking is illegal, except for the fact that the ball must be caught behind the line of scrimmage. So you know, as soon as he runs, you know that there has to be a screen because the guy's ineligible. Otherwise, it's an eligible man downfield. So the defense, and I, looking back at it, I saw it in real time, and I went, oh, there's a covered receiver. And then the corner, or safety, whoever it was, the defensive back who was across from him was so far back, I went, all right, either he's making the read and he actually knows what's coming, or he's about to be fooled real bad. And lo and behold, yes. So I think that when everything is clicking, when they are on the same page, and when this offensive coordinator is calling the plays in a way to put everybody in the right position and to maximize the situation, as he has the last several weeks, with really very, very few instances of truly quote-unquote bad plays or bad play calls. Yeah, I think those are the instances where you see a quarterback who knows exactly what to do. They are on the same page, and he delivers and executes accordingly. And that's where he's efficient. That's where he's able to act quickly. And it's a simple enough thing to do because, again, everybody's on the same page and is prepared to do exactly that. When it gets off script, that's where, you know, that has nothing to do with the play caller. That has nothing to do with the coordinator. That gets... when you go off script, that's when lunacy can ensue. And clearly, we've seen when it gets off script, that's where, so far, things have not gone remotely according to plan. For Oregon, for Dillon Gabriel, for Will Stein, Dan Lanning, or anybody else, that's where things have really gone awry. So if they can manage to stay within the scope of the quote-unquote plan, particularly against Ohio State, That's how they have to operate. Frankly, the minute that he has too much time to think and operate, and this goes for almost any quarterback, by the way, but the minute that they get too far off script, either something just pops free and then, okay, luck behold, or you have to scramble or just get rid of the football. And I would say right now, based on his decision-making specifically in the red zone where you're more in a condensed field, then the answer has to be you're either scrambling or you're throwing it away. In a condensed field, I'd say right now it is showing that more time to operate and hope for something is not panning out accordingly.
James,
so I do think that they have some opportunities there, like I say, as long as they can stay according to the quote-unquote plan.
James, you made some really interesting points, I thought, in what you wrote off the game on Saturday and looking forward. And one was that this team's preseason hype and ranking and credibility really rested on the star power of the offense. You know, top transfer quarterback, stud transfer receivers, really mature running back room. You know, Tez coming back as a Biletnikoff candidate, stacked receivers, kind of top to bottom. But through these 5 weeks, the strength of the team, and especially against Michigan State, when Jordan over the last 2 weeks, when Jordan Burch has looked every bit as advertised, has really been the defense. I'm curious if you could sort of expound a little bit on that dichotomy of people know Oregon for offense, people think of Oregon for offense, but if this team is going to be, remain a top 3 team, if it's going to make the run through the Big Ten that it's trying to make and through the playoff, it's going to be this defense. What has stood out to you about that side of the ball? Jordan Burch is obvious, but beyond Burch, and how do you think this has become sort of the identity of this team?
Yeah, for all the things you mentioned there, Bill, and we chatted about it briefly on Friday night during the game.
Yep.
But I think it bears repeating. Look, it doesn't always have to be about how talent at the collegiate level translates to the pro level. You can be an excellent college player, and that skill set just plain doesn't line up with what the NFL wants and needs. Just doesn't. And that's okay. And that's regardless of position. You can be an elite college quarterback, and maybe you just take too long to throw. Your wind-up and your mechanics aren't good. Your footwork stinks. You're too short. Whatever it is. But you can still win a Heisman. You're just not going to be a first-round quarterback.
Yeah, let's talk about the great NFL career of Eric Crouch.
Yeah, exactly. You can be that a style of player that works to an extreme at the college level, and it just doesn't translate. There's plenty of G5 running backs who've run for crazy numbers of yards, and I'm not picking on Ashton Jeanty here. This isn't about to be some veiled shot. No. He does translate. But there are plenty of others out of the Mountain West over the years who have put up some crazy numbers, particularly multiple guys out of San Diego State. And guess what? Their size and their skill set just plain didn't translate as well to the next level. It worked in the Mountain West. It just didn't work there. Okay. For all the star power that they brought in and had and returned and et cetera, and when you land 2 quarterbacks simultaneously, 2 of the most prominent quarterbacks in the portal, that certainly fueled the fire that was all the attention on the offense. And for good reason. But a funny thing happens when you lose a first-round quarterback, a mid-round running back, and one of the best receivers in program, probably the best receiver in program history, who albeit went in the 4th round. And you replace them with a late-round or maybe UDFA quarterback, a mid-round at his ceiling running back. And right now, if we're talking about trading Troy Franklin for Evan Stewart, straight up, if that is the transaction, because after all, Tez came back, and so did Gary and Trayshawn. Right now, you wouldn't be putting Evan Stewart in the 2nd or 3rd round. Now, he could have an eruption the rest of the season and meet all the potential in the rest, but he hasn't done it. So a funny thing happens when you take that level of talent and you replace it with lesser, through the lens of the pros, talent. Whereas on the defensive side, they massively overhauled. They replaced the oldest and most experienced defensive line in the country who had several either players drafted or UDFA types of the like, and a couple of guys out of the secondary also, and et cetera, et cetera. And you replace them with equal or higher talent. Lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, the defense might actually be the top 10 unit on its side of the ball, and the offense might be a top 25 unit, just not a top 5 unit. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that they stink and they're not good and they're not going to win. It just means they're not as good as the year before. And the defense made as many improvements, if not more, and more significant ones. They just got overlooked because they're not quarterbacks. But lo and behold, you bring in Jabbar Muhammad, and I thought Kyrie Jackson played better than him last year anyway, but okay, you're at least level. And the only knock on Muhammad is his size in terms of the next level. You brought in safeties who are better than what you had before. You brought in defensive linemen who are at least as good as, if not higher, projectability and translatability to the next level. And a Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, specifically. And what their presence has allowed Birch to be able to do and take his game to the next level. Yeah. So, like I say, I sit there, we see these results, and it's like, it's not just a matter of hindsight or now you're just commenting on it because the results are there. No, it's like, this is fairly obvious, quite honestly. This is fairly intuitive. This should not be a shock. You upgraded talent on one side. You, at best, have level talent and, frankly, probably a degree less than on the other side. And that doesn't mean things are awful or bad. It just means it's not as good as it was before. And you can still win. You can still be successful. You can still be a playoff team. You can still contend and win a national championship. It's just that you're not going to have the number 2 offense in the country. And that's okay. But I think this fan base has gotten so engrossed and obsessed with offense over the last generation that anything outside of a first-round quarterback is abysmal failure. And that's simply not the case. But they have gotten so accustomed to and spoiled by first-round quarterbacks, surrounded, by the way, usually with very little other talent, to where now having a really good college quarterback, who just may not translate to the next level because he's not that tall, that surrounded with more talent at the skill positions, maybe not elite talent by way of first and second round talent, but a talent nevertheless, that may not suffice in the eyes of the masses. Because after all, this isn't Nix, Herbert, Smith, Harrington, Clemens et al. Not for nothing. Oregon beat Ohio State 3 years ago. I seem to remember Anthony Brown was the quarterback, and nobody even liked him when he was here. From the masses, from the fans. They hated him, except he won in Columbus. I don't know. I think he can manage to win at this level without necessarily having a first-round quarterback. And especially when you have an elite defense, I think what this defense is doing should be far more celebrated so far than it has been, albeit against the competition. I think that deserves far more praise and attention than the vitriol, some of which has been completely irrational, directed at Gabriel, directed at offensive linemen, directed at Will Stein, directed at Malik Terry. Take your pick. Depending on the week, someone's got the target on them. I think that is way overblown, and I think the praise to the defense is way, way understated so far. Now, they have to back it up, obviously, this week against the most vaunted attack they can see. But to this point, I don't think they've gotten enough credit. Whereas I think the blame and the criticism has been way, way, way out of proportion.
So you touched on this vaunted attack of Ohio State. We know Oregon inside and out. What I'm curious about and what I want to drill into here is what the actual stakes of this game are, particularly in the new era with a 12-team playoff. A loss is not going to be disqualifying. Even in a 14 playoff, if Oregon had been in the Big Ten in a 14 playoff, a loss here may not be disqualifying. But in a 12-team playoff, what are the actual stakes of this weekend's game? Because my initial thought is, hey, if Oregon beats Ohio State this weekend, it's really hard to not see them in the playoff in some form. Doesn't mean that they couldn't trip up and lose a Big Ten title game and miss out. I mean, of course they could. But, you win this game, in my estimation, you're a playoff team. If you lose and lose with some credibility, lose credibly in this game, and put up a good fight, you might still be a playoff team. Maybe that affects your seeding or your ability to get one of those first round buys. But what do you feel are the actual stakes of this game, aside from it's a top 3 matchup, there's a ton of buzz, it's going to be a great measuring stick for Oregon and Ohio State for that matter. But how do you see the stakes?
I think the stakes in the short term and potentially for the long term are for number 1 in the polls, not only for next week, because the caliber of the win would easily surpass that of Texas at this point.
Is it better than Alabama's taken itself down a peg, obviously, with last weekend's unthinkable loss. But, yes. Up to that point, the win of the year was Alabama over Georgia. To that point. In a vacuum, I guess, in a vacuum, Oregon beating Ohio State becomes the win of the year, if that happens.
Yes, or vice versa, quite frankly. It just does. So I think that the winner moves to 1, and I don't think it's just a short-term blip of 1. I think that they would carry 1 until the day that they potentially fall. I think they would be 1 the rest of the way because they both have some decent games to keep them up there, even if there's a follow it up with a Purdue or something. Yes, but eventually you do have other ranked opponents. You have Illinois, you have Michigan, you have Wisconsin, you have Washington at the end. So there are other ones to back up. And for Ohio State's purposes, they do have Penn State on the road. So there are games that we continue to keep them in the conversation, even as Texas has to play Georgia and has other opponents in the SEC that are also very difficult. But be that as it may, I think the stakes are, what is the value of 1? Well, the value of 1 is the obvious, that if you then run the table, win your league, get the bye, that you have the ultimate geographic preference for the playoff and the seeding that comes along with it. And we can quibble about what 1 versus 2 will ultimately mean. Well, we'll find out. We don't know now. You don't know for sure yet, and there's no point in projecting because so many variables at this point. But there is that. To the greater optics, though, outside of who's 6-0 and who has the tiebreaker and who is in the driver's seat for being in the Big Ten championship game and playoff and all those sorts of things, because the loser ultimately is still alive for those things, but they're then at the mercy of, not for nothing, does Indiana lose? As just one example. They're at the mercy of discretion in terms of the playoff committee if they don't win the conference championship, whether they make it or not, in terms of seeding and those things. That would be one. But for the greater and more holistic outside of the season, when you talk about program building, when you talk about recruiting and those things, these two programs have been clawing at each other's throats for the last couple of cycles, into this cycle, into 26, 27, etc., for the absolute cream of the crop in terms of recruits. And that's not going to stop anytime soon. So if they are going to be waging battles on and off the field, when you're not playing each other on an annual basis outside of a conference championship that you both have to make, every meeting that you do have is that much more valuable when you are going at each other for the volume of recruits that these two teams are going at each other for. And that list is only growing by the day. It's not being trimmed down at all. These two are going at each other for every elite player that they can, that is out there. And it's been that way. And like I say, it's going to continue to be that way. So how does one game necessarily shape and impact that? I think a win for Oregon would go further in the off-the-field recruiting trail battles than a win for Ohio State would. Because one program has more history and has the trophies that the other one simply doesn't have. You walk in and you see crystal balls and playoff trophies at the Woody Hayes Center. You don't see those same trophies at the HDC. Heisman's, other things, sure. And all the other fancy stuff, they've both got more Nike product than they could ever ask for. Yeah, but who's done more winning? Well, the one that has the greater history, obviously. But I think a win, that doesn't mean you instantly, suddenly flip somebody or land another 5-star because of it. No, but I think what you're selling is the validity.
That's the word I was.
And this coaching staff didn't have the 21 win. And not for nothing. Yep. The 21 win is 3 years ago, and that might as well be a lifetime ago to a player who's a sophomore, junior in high school.
A sophomore, junior in high school doesn't even know who Anthony Brown is. You know what I mean? Like, and also, I mean, not for nothing, but that game lost some shine along the way as Ohio State didn't have a terrific year.
A great year.
And so it was like, oh wow, at the moment it was what an amazing win by Oregon on the road. And I don't want to take anything away from that team or from that success, because that is a hallmark win. But over the course of the year, it's like, oh, I see how Oregon went and won that game. It made more sense as we got deeper into the season. And I think you're right. The word I was looking for, and I think I used this in my column on Friday, kind of looking ahead, was validation. I don't think I don't think you lose a ton if you come up short against Ohio State. I don't think it hurts your credibility or it, necessarily costs you recruits, like you said, directly in that moment. It's like, nobody's saying eeny, meeny, miny, mo, whoever wins on Saturday, that's where I'm going to go. But maybe somebody is, I don't know. But the opportunity of what a win would do optically, like you said, reputation wise, the validation of this move to the Big Ten, and, sort of being the juggernaut that in year one that you sort of have cast yourselves as, kind of living up to, the mighty different of it all and the giant duck and all this off-field stuff that really has nothing to do with the team and with, the on-field product and who these players are and how they play. But it's all kind of baked into the Oregon experience. And to be able to validate that with a win over, the New York Yankees of the Big Ten in year one on home turf, I think just would be such a kick down the doors sort of moment that would be very meaningful for this program moving forward. And I think real validation of Dan Lanning, by the way. Lanning has, when you look at the big games of Dan Lanning's tenure, the Ducks they've come up short. I mean, the UCLA win a couple of years ago was, a top 10 matchup that, kind of has been lost to history because, again, that UCLA team ended up not being as good as the number 9 ranking, suggested at the time. You lose to Washington 3 times. You lose to Oregon State once, in a top 25 game that would have gotten you to the Pac-12 championship. You lose the Pac-12 championship to Washington. You have a marquee matchup on the road at Georgia, and you come out of it looking like you're, a junior college team. And this program is in a very different place than game one when Dan Lanning took over. And I feel like everything that sort of happened, and not to make too much out of one regular season game, because again, like we've talked about, there's a lot that could happen either way out of this, but it does feel like almost everything that's happened out of that since that week 1 loss to Georgia has sort of been building toward this moment where it's like a redo against, the national blue blood, and has Oregon made the strides necessary to win this kind of game? Different in that you have them at home, different in that it's, it's Ohio State and Georgia. There's a lot of differences there too. Different in that it's Dylan Gabriel at quarterback and a whole host of characters around him. It's very different from Bo Nix and what he had in 2022. But I do think that when you think about Dan Lanning and his Oregon tenure, you see some really high profile losses and a whole lot of wins that none of which are of the same magnitude as the losses. And so a win at this level would be massive, I think, in terms of, again, validation of everything that Oregon has sort of represented itself as, and obviously the hype that has surrounded it.
Yeah, I say it's who it's validating to.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And absolutely. I think that's twofold. One, for this national narrative discourse, which, again, I think some people are way, way too obsessed with. But I think that's part of it. And for a significant part of the fan base, where obviously the ultimate validation comes with the crystal ball. And until you get there again, you can't even think about it. So this is the best thing you got until then. And the measuring stick until then, and the thing that will really make you pound your chest in the pursuit of it between now and then if you get the win. And I think there is a massive portion of this fan base who yearns for the validation not only of a championship, but needs to feel the validation every step along the way. And that because in lieu of the crystal ball and until the crystal ball ever arrives, they need things like this in order to feel like their school, their team, their program, their alma mater, whatever, how many of those boxes get checked, that they're the real one too, that they belong to. They may not be at the big kid table with all the blue bloods and the championship winners, but they know they're going to get there one day, and the reason why they know is because they win games like this. Well, in program history, they haven't won games like this. They have one win all time against the number 2 team. It was Florida State in the playoff. So historically speaking, they haven't had that. Yeah, it's changed more. They've been more competitive in some of these spots, in some of these ultimate ranked matchups over the last 10 and 15 years. Yeah. But for many, they need and seek, like I say, that external validation rather than seeing the process of the build that both Cristobal did and now Lanning's doing, and taking the incremental steps and appreciating those along the way, or finding the moments of celebration and to highlight, like I say, talking about the defense right now. No, that's not enough. You can't appreciate the performances along the way. You need, and I'm not saying that winning doesn't matter, don't get me wrong, but you need the certain kind of win. And when you don't have that kind of an opponent to get that validation, you need the game to look a certain kind of way. So when you didn't even have opponents that were worth a darn in the Pac-12 era, you needed Justin Herbert to throw 500 yards a game because, darn it, if it didn't look like that, well, then this offense isn't any good. The offensive coordinator stinks. It doesn't matter that they're the top 25 offense with no NFL other players around him. No, everything's awful because you didn't have an opponent to validate it anyway. Now you've got an opponent to validate it. Now you need it to the next level. And like I say, I think that's probably the biggest thing in the holistic view outside of the here and now and, yeah, who moves up in the poll and who's in the driver's seat for the Big Ten, who has the tie break, all those sorts of things. Yes, but I think to the outside of the standings, outside of the season, there's a lot of external validation for those, particularly among the masses. For those inside the program, I don't think that win or lose that they're going to be further validated or not by it, because I think I don't think anybody inside the building is terribly concerned about, like I say, validation.
Right.
I think they've already accomplished enough and see the path and see what they're doing and understand that they are in a better place, to your point, than they were, and they continue to be, and they're recruiting the right way and they're doing things the right way. And then if you focus on the process, that the results will come and do come.
It is the sort of thing where it's like you do get you find yourself at risk of getting caught up into sort of the hype narrative cycle of, oh, it's the biggest game. And I think you've checked me on this before, too. I think I remember having this conversation when Oregon hosted UCLA in that Chip Kelly game 2 years ago. And it is sort of a question of, well, what does that actually mean? What does biggest mean? I think that we can tangibly point to this game and the things that we're talking about, you know, the recruiting impact, the optics impact. And again, optics are nebulous. The sort of the deeper entrenchment of Dan Lanning and Eugene, of what a win would mean, that makes this the biggest game in at least Autzen Stadium history. I mean, the biggest games in school history have been national championships. But, you know, I went back and looked at this in August, James, because people were talking about this game really as soon as Oregon went to the Big Ten. So it's been a year of anticipation of Oregon hosting Ohio State at Autzen. We learned pretty shortly after that it was going to be this year, and then we had a date. But Oregon has hosted there's never been a top 3 matchup that Oregon has hosted in school history. Oregon has never hosted a top 5 matchup. So in terms of where two teams are in a given season, this is the biggest matchup in school history. Would you care to take even a stab, James, at the 6 top 10 matchups that have been hosted at Autzen Stadium over the years?
Well, there's multiple Washington games. I would imagine that there's at least one, if not two, USC games in there. I know that there's been a couple of UCLA top 10 UCLA teams, but I don't think Oregon was in the top 10 at the time that those happened, because that was back, I think, in like the 80s. I don't believe it would have been a top 10 or ranked.
Top 10.
Top 10. I don't think it was top 10 when like Nebraska and Michigan State in years back. I don't think those were top 10. I would venture to guess that it was largely a bunch of Washington games. Like I say, probably a couple of USC games. Yeah, I would say that. I think there was an Oklahoma game in there, and maybe one Nebraska one. I know that those Oklahoma Nebraska teams in some of those years were top 5, maybe even number 1 and number 2 teams, but I can't remember if Oregon was also ranked that high. And obviously that UCLA game a couple of years ago was I believe a top 10.
It was,
if memory serves me correctly. So, yeah, but I'd venture to guess that it's probably loaded more with Washington matchups than anything.
So, I looked this up in August, and so if any listeners want to check me on this and double check my work, I mean, I'm certainly allowing for the possibility I missed something. But the only 6 I found were 2022 when UCLA was number 9 and Oregon was number 10. And before that, so no Washington games on this list. 2014, Michigan State was number 7 and Oregon was number 3. In 2010, Stanford was number 9 and Oregon was number 4. 2009, USC was number 4 and Oregon was number 10. That was the big 47-20 win. 2007, Arizona State number 6, Oregon number 4. Also 2007, a week earlier, Oregon was number 5 and beat number 9 USC. So it's really something that's only occurred in modern history. And, largely, again, a lot of games, by the way, that, I mean, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention to the Ducks in 2007, but I don't even know if these all stand up as big games in the minds of Duck fans. I don't think that UCLA game 2 years ago goes down in history as such. I mean, obviously the USC wins do. Those Stanford games were, incredible. But I do think there's also kind of the question of, what feels like a big game in the moment always doesn't age as one. It feels like...
you mean that Colorado game last year didn't stand the test of time?
And by the way, you mentioned that Oklahoma game in 2006. I went back and looked. Oregon was ranked number 18. Oklahoma was 15. So it's like, that's a big-time matchup. It's still not a top 10 matchup, let alone top 5, top 3 like we have this weekend. So my point that I'm getting to here is it feels like almost no matter what happens on Saturday is going to go down as a historic day at Autzen Stadium. Because of the conference implications, because of the first year of the new playoff, because it's the arrival in the Big Ten, and then that's to say nothing if Oregon actually wins the game. It would certainly. I mean, it has to be the biggest win in the history of Eugene if it happens. Again, biggest, a super nebulous, vague term that I try to check myself when I use, but I think that all the factors are there.
Yeah, but Ohio State's not going to suddenly become a 9-3 football team this year.
Right, exactly. So it goes. This is going to be a historic day, regardless of what happens. But especially if Oregon can put it all together, and some of these issues that we've been talking about at the quarterback position, in the red zone, are able to sort themselves out. If the defense is able to perform at the level that we've seen over the last 3 weeks, Oregon's got a real shot here. I think in the summertime, the Ducks were a 1.5 point favorite. Odds makers had the Ducks as a slight favorite. It's jumped the fence. Ohio State's a slight favorite. Understandable given the first couple of weeks with the Ducks, but I do think the Ducks have kind of put their issues by and large from the Idaho and Boise State games in the rearview mirror. And I don't know if that means that you should be giving the Ducks the edge this weekend. I mean, I've got a little bit of heartburn trying to imagine them pulling this win off. But I mean, the talent is certainly there. I feel like the coaching is certainly there. I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if the Ducks actually win this thing.
No, I wouldn't be shocked by any stretch. Again, these are by far and away the 2 most talented teams in the Big Ten and 2 of the most talented teams in the country. So you wouldn't be shocked by an outcome either way. No, but
would you rule out a blowout one way or the other? Like, could Oregon lose this game 35-7?
I don't know, 35-7. That, to me, I think that would take a level of offensive almost collapse.
Yeah.
To be quite that ugly. I do think that they could lose. Let's put it this way. If it's a blowout, I think Ohio State blows out Oregon, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Because I think where the depth of talent comes through in some of the areas where I think Oregon could still be vulnerable are areas that I think Ohio State can exploit versus I don't know that there are a whole lot of areas, if any, that Ohio State is very vulnerable. And
right.
Even if Oregon exploited it, I'm not sure that they could exploit it to the tune of a 21-plus point win. That's why I say that. But I don't think either team blows out the other in general. But I would sooner rule out an Oregon blowout of Ohio State simply because, like I say, I just don't see how the number one defense in the country suddenly has all these areas to exploit, or that their offense with the receiving core that they have and the running back duo that they have suddenly has areas to massively exploit. But be it all as it may, we're not going to run through all the names because, frankly, there's too many. All right, look, both of these teams are loaded. If you listen to the right people, these are both $20 million plus rosters. They're loaded with talent. So if rattling off 10, 12 names on each side just to validate the fact that we know who they are.
They good.
You know who they are. They're good. They're really, really good. There's lots of talent at all positions. They're loaded with players, many of whom you've heard of. Lots of 4 and 5 stars all over the place. That's why it makes it the game that it is. We're not going to rattle off every single name. That doesn't change the fact that they're both really, really good. On all positions is going to be NFL talent all over the field, NFL matchups all over the field. And we'll probably bring a record number of scouts and GMs to Autzen Stadium along with everybody else. So, yes, it shapes up accordingly. One to certainly look forward to. One we will break down extensively all day on Saturday and the days to follow as we get into next week as well. Hopefully Bill will join us. Ryan will be back with us next week on next week's edition of the podcast. A reminder to folks to like, subscribe, 5-star review, all those things. So that way you get Ducks Confidential along with all the other fine podcasts, including Bill's podcast on the Oregonian Sports Podcast feed. And remind folks, Bill, for anything else, mailbags or other commentary and other ways to just otherwise pester you by emailing you or anything else that that people are welcome to do.
Well, you're welcome to email me. Call me Pond Scum, like a loyal reader did this morning. Those are always particularly appreciated.
Happy Monday.
Exactly. Have kind of the typical run of coverage, columns off games, anticipating games. Bill Oram's Big Ten is a weekly feature where I have a list that vastly exceeds 10 thoughts that are on my mind about the teams and games that we have in the state. A little bit of Oregon, a little bit of Oregon State here and there, and just excited for a big week. The podcast will drop midweek with Brenna Green from Coin 6, the Oregonian Sports Podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those to me via email or Bill Oram. What is my email address? boram@oregonian.com, on Twitter @Bill Oram. So all those fabulous spots, I'm available.
So there you have it. So you can call Bill whatever your favorite nickname for him might be. They don't call him Whiskers for nothing. So there you go. You can contact him accordingly. And like I say, I'm sure Bill will be able to not only have the other edition of his podcast with Brenna, but may or may not be joining Ryan and I next Monday. But we will definitely see you next Monday and enjoy the week that is for those who are going. Most definitely take it in because, yes, this, regardless of outcome, this is shaping up to be the biggest. It is one that is historic magnitude. And one that, if you're fortunate enough to have a ticket, you should really be able to take in and enjoy this one because it certainly does not come around every day. This is the kind of one that it makes for a lot of fun. For those of us who do it for work, yeah, it's fun too. But for fans, this is one that you really should be able to enjoy. And if you're watching from home, enjoy it too because this is it's shaping up to be obviously the loaded Saturday that is across college football. But this is the main course, that is for sure. So enjoy it. And we will, yes.
Sorry to interject. I know you're trying to get out of here, but I just want to say, this is the payoff for being a fan. If you've been a longtime fan of the Oregon Ducks and you were a fan, through the Rich Brooks era and through the slow build of this program into a Pac-12 power and then a national power, and suffered the pain of national title losses and Darren Thomas breaking his leg. I mean, just all these moments over the course of being a fan. it all has been like slowly building to a moment you get Ohio State at Autzen in a top 3 matchup with national championship implications. That's really fun. And so that's why you are a fan, is to have moments like this. So try to remember that during the 3.5 hours that we're going to get on Saturday. It's a lot of fun. It is fun for us too, like you said, James, but I envy fans on days like this, because you have a real connection to this program, to its history, to those colors, to this team. And, it's going to be one of a kind. And I hope that everybody does take a moment to sort of soak that in and appreciate that perspective.
I'm sure that will be expressed very eloquently on our Twitter feeds, no matter what is happening on Saturday night. I'm sure that will be exactly the tone and tenor that is expressed, no matter the outcome. That will just be appreciation and gratitude. Will be exactly what comes through.
The sky is falling, but as you look at that falling sky, look at the beautiful leaves of autumn, the wispy clouds, and the blue skies. Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. We'll see you next week.
Thanks very much for having me, James. I had fun.